He was 24 years old, $1,200 in debt, and selling running shoes out of the trunk of his car at track meets across Oregon. No storefront, no employees, no brand, and no reason for anyone to take him seriously. His name was Phil Knight, and the man who once had to beg his father for money to fund a business idea most people thought was ridiculous would eventually build Nike, the most valuable sports brand in the world, worth more than $50 billion, worn by every serious athlete on the planet. But the story of how it happened has almost nothing to do with sneakers. It has everything to do with obsession, betrayal, and a decision made in a moment of total desperation that changed the entire history of sport. Phil Knight grew up in Portland, Oregon, in a household where his father ran a local newspaper and expected conventional success from his son. Phil was not conventional. He was a competitive, middle-distance runner at the University of Oregon, training under a coach named Bill Bowerman, the most innovative track and field mind in America. Bowerman was obsessed with one idea above everything else. Lighter shoes made runners faster. He would literally take apart his athletes' shoes, study the construction, and rebuild them better. That obsession quietly transferred to Phil, who began to see footwear not as a product, but as a performance problem waiting to be solved. In 1958, Phil graduated from Oregon and enrolled at Stanford Business School. His professor, Frank Schallenberger, challenged his students to write a paper about a small business idea they believed in completely. Phil wrote about importing high-quality, low-cost Japanese running shoes to the American market and undercutting Adidas, then the dominant brand in track and field. He got an A on the paper. More importantly, he got an idea he could not let go of. In 1962, Phil graduated from Stanford with an MBA and almost nothing in his bank account. Instead of taking a corporate job, he borrowed a few $100s from his father and bought a plane ticket to Japan. The plan, such as it was, written on a single page: visit the Onitsuka Tiger factory in Kobe, convince them he represented a serious American company, and secure the distribution rights for their running shoes in the United States. The problem was that the company he claimed to represent did not exist. When the Onitsuka executives asked him the name of his business, he improvised on the spot and said Blue Ribbon Sports. He had no office, no employees, no track record, and no money. They gave him the deal anyway. Phil flew home with 12 pairs of sample shoes and mailed several to Bill Bowerman, expecting a polite response. Instead, Bowerman called immediately, offered to become a partner, and proposed they each invest $500 to launch the business. That conversation, worth $1,000 between two people with almost no capital, was the beginning of everything. In 1964, Blue Ribbon Sports was officially born. Phil's entire strategy was to sell Tigers, the Japanese shoes, directly to runners at track meets before anyone else could. He drove his green Plymouth Valiant to high school and college track events across the Pacific Northwest and opened the trunk. No catalog, no store, no advertising. Just Phil, standing beside his car, talking to athletes about shoes. He understood runners because he was one. He knew what hurt, what worked, and what the market needed because he had felt it himself. The shoes sold faster than Onitsuka could ship them. Orders multiplied. The company hired its first employee, Jeff Johnson, who was so committed to the brand that he sent Phil multiple letters every week with ideas for products, marketing, and stores. Phil mostly ignored the letters but kept hiring. By the late 1960s, Blue Ribbon Sports had several stores, growing revenue and a reputation in the running community that far exceeded what its size suggested. Then everything almost collapsed in a single meeting. By 1971, Onitsuka Tiger had noticed how valuable the American distribution rights had become. Instead of honoring the partnership, they approached Blue Ribbon Sports with an ultimatum. Sell us a controlling stake in your company, or we will find a new distributor and cut you off entirely. For Phil Knight, it was a moment of complete crisis. He had built his entire business around another company's product. He had no factory, no proprietary design, and no alternative. What he did next was either the most reckless decision in business history or the most necessary one. He refused to sell. He walked away from the only product that had kept his company alive, and he decided to build his own shoe brand from scratch with almost no money, no manufacturing infrastructure, and a debt that was growing by the week. He needed a name. He needed a logo, and he needed to move faster than he ever had before, because Tiger was already looking for a replacement. A graphic design student named Carolyn Davidson created the swoosh logo for $35. The name Nike came from Jeff Johnson, who dreamed it overnight, named after the Greek goddess of victory. The first shoes were produced in Japan. The first real breakthrough came from Bill Bowerman, who one morning poured rubber into his wife's waffle iron to create the textured sole that became the Nike Waffle Trainer, one of the best-selling running shoes of the decade. The combination of a revolutionary sole, a name that athletes trusted, and a distribution network already built during the Blue Ribbon years gave Nike an advantage no competitor expected from a brand that technically did not exist 12 months earlier. By 1975, Nike had overtaken Tiger's market share in the United States. By 1978, it was the best-selling running shoe in America. 2 years later, the company went public. Phil Knight, who had once sold shoes from the trunk of a Plymouth Valiant, was now worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Phil Knight died, and then he didn't. That's the wrong story. Phil Knight is still alive, and the brand he built is still growing. But the real ending of this story is not about the money or the IPO or the athlete endorsements. It is about a 24-year-old with an idea written on a single piece of paper, a $1,000 split between two people, and a trunk full of shoes he sold one pair at a time at the side of a running track. The entire Nike empire, the stadium advertising, the billion-dollar athlete contracts, the most recognizable swoosh on earth, started there. Not in a boardroom, not with investors, not with a brilliant pitch. It started with someone willing to open the trunk and start selling before anyone told him he was allowed to. Subscribe for more stories like this, because the next empire might start exactly where you least expect it.